Hi, and welcome to another SBOM update for February 25 for SBOM Europe. We've been traveling and we want to share some experiences from FOSDEM and the EU Open Source Week in Brussels in February 25. And we are Olle Johansson, myself, coming from Sweden and working with software application security, real-time communications, PKIs, and many other things. And together with me is my partner in SBOM Europe, Anthony Harrison. Tell us a bit about yourself, Anthony.
Hello, everyone. Yes, Anthony Harrison from the UK. Open source development, lots of things around software bill of materials and software risk. And obviously, the last few weeks has been very busy, sharing and gaining new knowledge.
Yes, hasn't it? The EU Open Source Week in Brussels, it started many years ago with something called FOSDEM, the Free and Open Source Conference that occupied the whole university. But then we saw events coming the days before and the days after that was called the FOSDEM Fringe. And now it's called the EU Open Source Week because they added a lot of events from the various open source foundations, but also the European Union in itself and other related organizations have meetings this week surrounding open source and a lot of new events that actually is about compliance and new regulations and how open source relates to all this work, like the EU Product Liability Directive, the EU Cyber Resilience Act, the EU NIS 2 regulation, and many others. So, yes.
It's also, by making it a sort of longer than just the 2 days, it makes it worth people traveling greater distances. So we get now quite a lot of contributions coming in from the US because it's worth the travel.
Oh, yeah.
To spend time for a week in Europe, and working with the large community. Which, whereas FOSDEM just been 2 days, it's probably not quite worth the long hop over.
No, back then it was purely European open source developers, but a massive amount of them. Yeah. In fact, I was a bit worried because there was a flight leaving from the Stockholm Bromma airport in the Friday afternoon that was 90% open source developers and users. If something happens with that plane, we would have a big security issue with open source. Yeah. But now it's spread out, and as you say, we have many visitors from the US and other parts of the world as well. So it's a great time to be in Brussels, and as both Anthony and I are involved in many different projects surrounding SBOMs and the regulations, we were quite busy. Or I would say I should have been more busy than I was because I ended up with a flu in a hotel for 2 days. But let's try to forget that part and move in. And I flew in on Wednesday because we were called to the EU Commission. I would say a number of open source foundations, and I was representing OWASP as part of Cyclone DX work. We were actually a few people on site from OWASP, as you see in the picture. And there were a lot of people from OWASP connecting virtually online, but we also had the kernel, Linux Foundation, OpenSSF, Apache Foundation, PHP Foundation, Eclipse Foundation, of course, and many others. If I've forgotten someone, I apologize. But we had a very open discussion with the Commission and with CISA and ENISA, CISA being the American cybersecurity agency, about how to work together to actually manage vulnerabilities in open source, how to disclose them, what kind of help we needed, and many other things. It was a very good discussion, but we from the open source side realized that we probably need to speak a bit more about this So we have started discussions that will likely maybe form a working group on this topic within the ORCWG. So that was a very productive day.
Were there any sort of key lessons that you were seeing, from the US, who was sort of being a little bit ahead of the curve and where Europe is in terms of their experience of handling vulnerabilities?
I think the CISA strongly pointed out that they are assisting open source. They're providing resources for open source developers, not requiring them to do a lot of things on their free time. I think that was a very important message to ENISA and the EU Commission. ENISA talked a little bit about the EU vulnerability database, which seems to be not so much a new database, but an aggregation of existing databases. And we had many discussions and gave them feedback on that. But it was a very good start of something, I believe, and I'm looking forward to continuing this discussion. And it was a very open attitude from both ENISA and the Commission, which I really, really like. So we'll see where this goes. But from OVASP, we were very happy to have seats around the table, and we participated actively in the discussion. So Wednesday evening, Eclipse Foundation or CVG invited to kind of a chat and drinks with a few talks to start the week, talking about the CRA and how that affects open source. So this was kind of a taste of what's coming from our CVG. But the real work was done during Thursday, and you participated, Anthony.
Yeah, so I flew in on early Thursday morning, and it was it was an interesting workshop because it was driven primarily by the ORCG, CRG, that group, and it was quite interesting to see the views of the various open source communities relating to what the CRA was starting to require. But a lot of discussions about the open source steward, understanding what that role will be, and understanding the gaps that are going to have to be filled by the standards. And I think I was struck very much by the number of standards and how long it's going to take for those standards to get to issue, really. Given that we've now got a phased release of the CRA, sort of the first release is sort of September next year, before the final one in the end of 2027, to have the standards sort of only dropping sort of a few weeks before the actual be coming to before the dates, I think is a little bit of a concern. They did explain, the commission also attended, and they explained the review process. But there's a sort of a group of people working with Senelec and EXE and the other group, Sen, to develop the first drafts before it goes out to the community.
But there is a little bit of problem there. First, going back to the abbreviation here, is Open Regulatory Compliance Work Group, or CVG. It's a very strong name, but hard to pronounce.
Yes.
And the worry here is that Senelec standardization starts with the national bodies. In Sweden, we have CIS, and in Germany, I think you have DIN. And then you give your input. And this is driven by the industry. It requires membership fees. It requires a lot of hours of work. And open source and open standards doesn't really have those resources to participate. There are a few of us that do that. And that means that the result can be worrying for open source and the treatment of open source.
Yes.
So we really need to find resources to participate. From OVASP, we have a liaison with ISO, which means we can participate freely, but then we need the time and resources for doing that, because it takes a lot. And those standards are pay-for standards. So most open source projects won't have access to them.
Yeah, and I
because
think
they're rather expensive.
That's a really important point about having standards behind the paywalls is potentially a significant challenge for small projects who have to comply, or even small businesses. It becomes quite standards will build up when there's 41 standards. Now, not all of them will apply to every product, but some are. So you're going to have to probably have access to more than 10 to understand what you have to do to comply, which is obviously a concern. And I think, it's all CRA is all about risk, but understanding how to do the risk assessment to ensure that you can comply with what's required is going to take time. And then understanding the issues with vulnerability management, which the workshop you had the previous day is also important. So there's there's a lot of, I think we understand that things are going to happen. Maybe they're not happening fast enough, and what the role of the community will be to actually shape some of the standards to ensure that the standards do not come up with things that are not expected. I think that's my concern. Is we want to try and be, we've already got good experiences around the world of how to do secure software, secure systems. Let's try and build on those rather than try and do things.
And from the ORCWG perspective, their perspective is open source. It is important that the relationship between manufacturers and open source projects are not harmed, that you don't end up with strange requirements on the open source projects.
Yes.
So the ORCWG is continuing the work. We have regular meetings, and we're writing an FAQ and sending questions for clarifications to the Commission. There are multiple groups working like this. The ORCWG is the biggest one, but there's also a lot of work done in OpenSSF for the CRA. But I haven't found similar pan-European or global working groups for manufacturers. That would be very interesting to see if we can find discussions for manufacturers in the same open way. But that's another topic.
Yeah, and there's also how organisations outside the EU, countries like the UK, like the US, like Asia, how they can contribute to understand what's going to come to them now. And that there was the UK standards body is meant to have a voice, but that from discussions that sounded like there was some. It wasn't that forthcoming in terms of engagement.
No.
But obviously, hopefully, the first standard I think should be in draft by the early summer. So maybe that might give us, once we get that level of information, we may then understand.
The interesting fact is that there's another regulation, the RED Radio Directive Delegated Act, that enforces cybersecurity on products with radio. And this will come in effect in August this year. So the Sentinel Lake documents are almost done. But we can read them as a kind of pointer on where they're going, because the Red DA will be in part replaced by the Cyber Resilience Act later. One has to remember also that all these 41 standards that's been required by the EU Commission to produce is only one way. You can self-certify according to the actual CRA text, or by following and complying with horizontal standards. But the certifications for critical and important products may likely hook into the horizontal standards. But that's a small amount of all the products, but important products. But let's move on. This was Thursday, the workshop. And sorry, you attended the About Code compliance workshop on Friday.
So if the Thursday day was a bit more of an education, Friday was very much a celebration, and it was really good to see so many of the community who I know and have worked with together in one room. And it wasn't just the developers, the open source developers of tools. It was also customers of it. Also, the EU, I think, attended as well to see the energy in people trying to make tools work together to support things like the compliance we're going to need for CRA.
What kind of tools were they discussing?
So if you think about a life cycle, you're talking about things looking at the source code and identifying things like licenses. There's a lot of work in terms of identifying the licenses and ensuring the licenses are fully understood. I think we're well aware that
that's where the SBOM history is.
Yes,
the open source license compliance. So we're still working on that.
Yes, and you think like tools like ORT has really come from the German car industry in terms of how to understand the open source licenses of all their software. So it was really good to see so many different tools, but actually we all together collaborate. And I think one of the outcomes I'm hoping we were trying to get was trying to build an architectural picture of where all the tools fit together. So some of them are focused very much on the source code. Some are some of the tools I try and develop are generating on some of the build and the outcome of the build process. I think we need both of them. And then we've got some of the big assessment tools that people like GWAC are doing, which Google have done. Not Google, well, Google have helped support it, but through the OpenSSF, which are looking at sort of the overall policies and how all the different artifacts come together to give you that view and risk assessment. So it was really, really good. The day was split into two. Sort of the morning was very much the tool side, telling you what we've got. Lots of SBOM generators from the different from the Cyclone DX or SPDX, various tooling. And then the afternoon was very much on the user side. What do users want to see in the tools? And that's quite useful. Probably the biggest message I got was there's no one tool that does everything. So there's a lot required in terms of interoperability. So you may generate and then use another tool to scan or several tools to scan for vulnerability management or license management. You're not going to get one tool that does everything. And I think that's probably a really big message for people building their tool chain that we're going to need to for the CRA is you're not going to get one tool that does everything. You need to sort of be prepared to try a few and integrate together.
Yeah. A bit of a personal question now. Do you remember when we were young, and there was a discussion when I moved from home? I really wanted to buy my big stereo set, right? That was the first thing after moving from home, and there was a discussion about those integrated stereos with speakers and gramophone and everything in one, or buying separate modules and combining the best. I think we're at that point now. So I really would like to see that map kind of, because many vendors are trying to sell that integrated stereo or promise that integrated stereo, but they're not delivering that. They're only delivering the loudspeakers or the gramophone or cassette player. And we need to help the customers, because if they believe they buy a tool that solves all the problems, including sliced bread, then they're going to have a bad experience.
Yeah, and I
think the vendors are just trying to find a market here.
Yes, yeah, and I think there's the SCA space is quite a mature. The software composition analysis is quite a mature space. But there's one of the things we came out from the workshop was things we needed as a community. One was a picture of an architecture. I would really like to. I think that will come in the next few months. I think we'll start building that. The other thing was about validation. So when people are creating SBOM generation tools, how do you know that SBOM generation tool is good? Because is it complete? Is it a complete? Has it picked up all the components? And is it picking up the right information? Is it because I've certainly seen examples where you run the two generators on the same
Yep.
product, and you get different licenses. Well, which one do you believe? So I think we need to build as a community. We need to build a sort of a reference set as well as a reference architecture, and I'm hoping that will come.
Yeah.
Everybody in that room are the people who can make that happen.
Yep.
Let's hope that comes soon, because I think it'll be a great benefit for the end users as well.
I have a couple of pet peeves here. One is I want to be able to produce metadata as scanner input, because when I create a system, I know a lot of the components and I can give pointers to that. But also, I don't believe in any scanner producing the SBOM I really want for a product I'm producing. So I think that there has to be a new way of looking at this, saying, I have this, which is my reference SBOM, and this is what I believe currently is the source of truth. And I have all these output SBOMs or other files that is produced by various tools. And I want to see the differences between these and monitor the differences, and maybe decide to update my reference SBOM.
Yeah.
I think those are the tools we need. And especially if you're going to deliver an SBOM to customers, that reference SBOM is what your compliance department, your security officers have signed off on.
Yeah.
And if anything changes in the code or in dependencies, they want to know as well.
Yes. Yeah, and there has been an exercise tail end of last year run by SEI in the US from a contract that CISA offered, which was to compare various generators. I was part of that, and it's I think they've had some quite interesting observations. I think the feedback they want to give is to understand when people are building source SBOMs and build SBOMs, the differences and how accurate people are, what the challenges are. Clearly, data is a big. The quality of data is a big one. So we'll move on to that, I think, in terms of when we talk about FOSDEM and what some of the things.
Yeah, we're digressing. Let's go back to FOSDEM.
Yeah.
And see what happened. During Friday, I was in my hotel room trying to get better because I had this big talk in the main track on Saturday. Otherwise, Saturday was spent more about meeting people in the corridors, in the booth, trying to get stickers and T-shirts and all of that. But there was a lot of interesting people to meet and a lot of friends to meet from my open source past and my open source future. But I had a talk that's available. We'll put links in the show notes on sbomeurope.eu and on LinkedIn. It was a 40-minute talk, I would say, where I introduced our SBOM meter, tried to discuss SBOMs and SBOM usage and the maturity level of SBOMs, where in some cases, like open source license compliance, we have a lot of the tools, we have a lot of the knowledge because that's the history of SBOM. But in some cases, in some other areas, we are not where I would like us to be. And I asked the audience for help. Join us in the work in ORCWG and OWASP and OpenSSF to move the SBOM meter forward. We have a few years in Europe for the CRA to get this done, and it's important that we work together. That was the basis of my talk, but it's available on YouTube. I have a very interesting voice, but I still managed. I got help from Anthony and Kate Stewart to answer questions at the end, which I'm really grateful for.
I think it was very good. I think you had a good attendance. I think people are having to get to understand SBOMs. There's quite a few people that SBOMs are not as well known as you and I know. So I think it was a really good introduction to SBOMs, and also it was very good to sort of link the Friday workshop with the Sunday dev room. which
Yes.
was to try and introduce people to say, okay, how do you bridge the gap between where we are and where we're going? So I think it was a really good introduction. So yeah.
And I'm quite happy personally that I managed to speak about SBOM for 40 minutes without showing a single JSON or XML file snippet. So I talked about SBOM usage and where SBOM fits into the process. But go look at it on the FOSDEM website. We'll provide you with links soon. So other than that, what did you do on Saturday? Any interesting talks you attended?
So I've been to FOSDEM a few times and I've learned the way to do the Saturday is, yes, you go and get your stickers and your T-shirts, but then you don't try and go and see as many talks. So I saw one talk about in the legal room, which was somebody proposing, Bradley Kuhn, saying there's no mandate for us for SBOMs. So it was an opinion. Opinion is entitled to the opinion. Go and look at that if you want to see what was stated. I got a feeling that the room had different views, but at least it was worth him expressing his view of where he was.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
And it's clearly he has a particular view coming from his background in the software conservatory, the Software Conservatory Association or Foundation.
Yep.
And where he's obviously very much trying to promote open source, and open source is already transparent. So why do you need an SBOM if everything's already transparent? Clearly, there's an issue with proprietary software. So
yep.
and again, watch the video and watch the questions, because I think the questions were also quite enlightening as well. Because I think they teased out a few things that weren't said in the presentation.
But basically, the CRA mandates manufacturers to have an SBOM. There is a mandate. It doesn't say that manufacturer has to provide SBOM to customers. That's more or less optional.
Yes.
But we have, during a FOSDEM and the days before, we had a lot of discussions, and they continue on. And I think we need to put our heads together and write something here. Why should the open source project have SBOMs, or either internally or provide them to users? We see now that a Python package can actually include C binaries or other external components. So they are exposing that with SBOMs. There's a new PIP regulation coming out. You and I have been having many discussions with Apache Foundation security group, especially the Log4j project. And the Log4j project say that they want an SBOM to make sure that you can always build a Log4j with secure dependencies. If something happens, so you cannot build a Log4j version that they support because the dependencies are broken, they think that they need to be aware of it and see if they have resources to mitigate that. And I think that's a good attitude. Make sure that downstream can always use your software without any known vulnerabilities. Mm-hmm. But there are discussions on whether there's a need for SBOMs for open source projects. Yeah. I also had a very interesting discussion, and we continued that after FOSDEM, where some open source projects actually wants to be handled and seen as manufacturers in the light of CRA. They want to take that role because that they think they'll get better chances of getting resources from downstream manufacturers that way. And that's a very interesting take, not wanting to use the loopholes for open source or loopholes, the exclusions for open source in the CRA, but actually move themselves into the limelight and accept the liabilities with the CRA.
Yeah.
So we'll see what happens, but we digressed again. Let's go back. Are we done with Saturday?
Well, I'll do with Saturday, yeah. I mean, there's other things I did. You use FOSDEM as a way to educate yourself. So yeah, spend the time going around stands, I spent some time with the FOSDEM Junior this year, looking at the helping the next generation of coders, teaching that, which was very useful, and spending a little bit of time in the Go dev room, understanding about some features of Go that I don't know, which is great. So it's
Yes. Yep.
yeah. But yeah, the main event for us was the Sunday, the
Yep.
the SBOM Dev room, as the organisers said, each year, because this is the third year we've
Yep.
run the dev room, SBOM Dev room. Each year it's got bigger, and that I think is showing that there's the demand is there. Yeah, the room got full. It wasn't full.
People are really curious about SBOMs today, so that's why I think they flock to this room.
And I think there was also a very parallel session about the CRA. So people, depending on their interests, are they interested in the regulation? Are they interested in the technology? Let's say the technology of the SBOM.
Yeah, I don't envy the planners of FOSDEM, but it's very sad that we have the European legislation dev room at the same time as the SBOM dev room. But
it was good to see friends, and I think there's the communities there. Each year we see the same people turning up, which is great, and it's also quite regular, similar. The presenters are the same, but it's great to see what they've done in the last 12 months, and you're seeing progress, and I think that's really good. I think I will summarize at the beginning was really good was it was a lot more about practical experience this year of what people are using SBOMs for and what SBOMs are giving them, rather than what SBOMs could give them. And I think we're moving away from we're aware there's two formats. I think people are now concentrating on the content, which is great. I think we need to focus on the content rather than is it JSON, is it SPDX, is it Cyclone DX? We know they're different. We know they've got strengths and weaknesses. Let's more focus on how we can get the business value out of them, because that's what we need. The COA is going to really demand that business.
Yeah. No, I kind of agree, because previous years there's been a lot of visions, a lot of hope, but this year that it was real experiences, both from the open source world with Apache Talk and from industry.
Yes.
So I very much like that. Yeah,
I mean, I think there's a couple of things that I would say. Again, a lot of the videos are now available. It was good how Apache were using it, because Apache gave a couple of good projects. One, Apache Airflow, which is has got some funding from the Alpha Omega project to improve the security, and just the challenge of a very large successful project, and how they were managing the supply chain, all those dependencies, and how they could make their suppliers and the open source projects take security seriously. So it was, how does a project, you had 700 dependencies, how they could drive those dependencies to drive security. As I think from Nutex, is it one of which is an open source RTOS, and how they were using it just to make their product more reliable. They were just using SBOMs to actually drive improvement internally. So it was really good to see how they were seeing value of it. It's work in progress, as is very apparent, but it was good to see they were making some traction and sharing their experiences, because those experiences are going to be valuable for others. I also quite like the experience that Google was sharing. Google are generating something like 4 million SBOMs a week.
Yeah, this was really interesting, because this talk was about how Google internally monetize and put SBOMs into action.
Yes, and I think they were saying they were generating source SBOMs, build SBOMs, deployed SBOMs. They were saying the best ones to do to deliver the value that they were seeing was a build SBOM, and I think I agree with that. I think there's a lot more that gives you a lot more clarity about what's likely to go into production, which at source level, there's too many options at a source level. Compile time options can completely change your product, which libraries you get in, which dependencies.
The source level is the kind of SBOM that I'm having most problems with, trying to understand why it's useful. There is a license compliance
Yes.
thing with actually going through the source code, and there's also in the old days we discussed something called tripwire to monitor that our service didn't change for external actors or bad software, and you can use source SBOMs for kind of doing that. But the open source licenses you get from source is in many cases not the same as you get in build, because the license changes because
Yes.
GPL is sticky or something else.
And I think the source one is a very valuable one for license compliance. What we're not seeing yet is much evidence. There was there was one presentation about the design SBOM, a project called Basil, which is looking at trying to show how SBOMs can support a safety case, and showing all the traceability of all the different system artifacts, which is very
Yeah.
useful. I can reflect that. It's it's hard work. But then there's not much evidence at the moment. I'm hoping we will start seeing this in what we'll call the runtime SBOM, so we can start seeing what's running in a system, and we can say is how that reflects to the SBOM. SBOMs are big. I think I would love to say an SBOM could be delivered as part of a build, but for some of the embedded devices, the SBOM is bigger than the software, so that's not feasible unless we find an alternative way of compressing SBOMs. But it's really good. I think you will find a good variety of talks and experiences and tips and tricks. I mean, the legacy cost software of C is still a challenge. I've had some discussions after the conference, following up on that. I think binary SBOMs or SBOMs from binaries is it's something I'm working on, but it's actually something that I think as an industry we need to try and spend a little bit more time trying to understand that. The non-package manager software is very much alive and well, and we need to recognize that everything is not in a nice package manager, so we need to recognize that software has to be.
And there's a risk, because if you assume that if you have a Debian system that everything installed by packages, that's a wrong assumption, because you may very well transfer files in other ways and install them. So even if the base operating system and many tools are installed using the Debian package manager, you need to find the rest of the stuff that's outside of that. But I also want to highlight a talk this day by my Norwegian friend Salve Nilsen, who has done a really, really good job trying to parse, like a nitty-gritty compliance officer, all the requirements put on from the regulator side on SBOMs and compliance and software transparency. He's part of the CPAN security team, CPAN being the Perl package repository. But his talk, if it's available, as it should be available now as video on FOSDEM.org, is really good and highlights the requirements that come from various sources on stuff we probably need to put in SBOMs, and some of it we don't even have an enumeration for it yet. So that talk, I really appreciate it, and I will look at it again to remind myself and properly download the slides.
And he was very entertaining. He made it entertaining because compliance
he
is
made
not the most entertaining subject, but he got engagement, and actually the messaging was very clear. We started with a baseline from the US with the NTIA minimum standards in 2021. And as we are seeing standards coming from the EU, from Germany, from India, from other countries, people are adding more and more requirements, and we haven't got the base yet. So adding more isn't going to make our problem any easier. It's going to make it harder. No. So I think it was a really good message to the regulators to don't be don't push the boat out too quickly. Basically work with the community, and
Yeah, and I don't think the regulators understand that they raise the bar. It's kind of just happening randomly. But if they raise the bar too high, it's going to be really hard to be compliant. We need to work hand in hand with fixing this. It's like right now in Cyclone DX, we have a request for comments out for a change. And this is driven a lot by requirements from regulators that we need to be able to document in an SBOM, not internal components that we actually is part of your delivery, but also requirements of external components that needs to be on the system in order for the software you documented in your SBOM to run. So we need to get all of these processes, the standards for SBOMs, SPDX and Cyclone DX, and the regulators to work together, but also, like Salve did, tell the regulators that, hey, take a break. We need to catch up here, and tell them we don't think you know what you're doing by adding these requirements.
Yeah.
So that was a very good talk.
It was a good. I mean, I think I understand why people would like the information, but it's just.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think it's
But they didn't understand the consequences, and that's what Salve highlighted. So, what can we say is the summary of this wild week in Brussels?
I think it was a very busy week. I think we both felt, it was 4 or 5 very intense days. Great to be working with friends. I think the community is a friendly community. I think the message I would get over is don't wait to FOSDEM 2026 to start working on some of these issues, and wait for the issues. Be part of the community to solve these issues, because there are issues that we need to solve. It's not going to be 1 or 2 people are going to solve it. It's the community that's going to solve some of these challenges. And this time next year, COA will be less than 8 months away from being its first stage, the vulnerability handling. We need to really be sort of in the home straight this time next year for that stage, and that's going to take a lot of work from the community. So let's be there, support the community, because most of the community is volunteers and doing this free of not funded. If you can fund it, then that would also be great to help make it better.
Yep. I would also add, I fully agree with that, and that was the end of my talk. Join us, help us move forward, and all these workshops and communities are very open for newcomers. So it's not a high bar or exams to join us. Just join us with your questions, your thoughts, your worries. But I would like to add, I'm really happy to see that the commission experts are getting engaged. They were at ORCWG meetings. They participated in FOSDEM. They've done that a few times already. They're very open for discussion and feedback and input. They really want to get this right. And I think that's really, really good. And I encourage those discussions and to work on those forums. But as I said, I haven't seen the commercial side of things creating forums on a European base like we do now with open source. But if you're using open source or you're active in open source, please join us.
And as you can tell, there's been a lot to discuss. There's an awful lot of, there's over 1,000 videos from FOSDEM to watch. So so that'll keep you going. But there's a lot of valuable information. But use those videos to go and then join the community. So
and we're going to publish some of the highlights on the SBOMEurope.eu blog.
Yes.
Our recommendations, of course, our own talks, but also a few others.
Right, I think that's plenty. We've had plenty to discuss there, plenty more. But let's call it a day there.
Yeah, And we're going to produce more SBOM updates as we have new news. Thank you for listening or watching us. These updates are available on YouTube as a video where you can see slides and pictures and our lovely postcard from Brussels, but also on Apple Podcasts. Thank you for watching, and see you again soon.
Bye.
Bye.